The stars were dying. They had been dying for as long as anyone could remember, yet never had their decline felt so heavy, so absolute. Entire constellations dimmed in the black gulfs between worlds, leaving swaths of the galaxy shrouded in perpetual night. Planets that had once basked in the light of their parent suns now turned to ice and silence, their cities frozen mid-breath. Great monuments of stone and steel stood abandoned, their inscriptions worn away by the passage of 1,000 years, their victories unremembered. And the Imperium, once the unshakable fortress of mankind's dominion, shivered, not from fear of the enemy beyond its borders, but from the slow rot gnawing at its own heart. We have seen empires rise like fire and fall like ash. We have seen kings and conquerors, saints and tyrants, all swallowed by time. And yet, to speak of the Imperium's decline is to speak of the death of something older, something greater, a dream that once dared to unite the stars themselves. And you, listener, are a part of this journey. We truly love and care for you, for it is in the shared telling of such stories that they survive the long dark. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. The fall of Verath Prime was the first stone to slip from the mountain. I had commanded its defense myself, and still the world had burned. The enemy had not been alien raiders, nor heretical cults rising from its undercities, but famine. Crops failed, supply lines broke under the weight of bureaucratic neglect, and its billions turned on one another, while the high lords of terror debated tariffs and tithes. We fought not against an army, but against the slow cruelty of starvation. My fleets brought food too late. My regiments restored order only in pockets. By the time the grain ships finally arrived, the planet's oceans were black with ash. I remember walking the avenues of Verath Prime's capital in those final days. The streets were empty, save for the flutter of torn imperial banners in the wind. The great statue of the Emperor in the central plaza had been pulled down, not in rebellion, but in quiet despair. The people had prayed to him, and he had not answered. I had knelt there, not in worship, but in apology. For what is immortality if it means standing witness to failure over and over, powerless to halt it? Immortality had been my reward and my curse. My name had been etched into the annals of the Crusades, my victories sung by countless worlds. I had seen the galaxy's expanse, from the black fortress moons at its edge to the throne world's gold-shrouded spires. I had sworn oaths to defend the Imperium until the stars themselves went cold. But now those same oaths chained me to an empire crumbling from within, a mausoleum of ideals. Word of Verath Prime's fall had already reached Terra by the time I returned. The summons came, within hours, an audience with the Senatorum Imperialis. The High Lords would want explanations, perhaps scapegoats. I had given them neither before, and I would not now. But I knew this time would be different. The Imperium's decline had entered a stage where someone would have to bleed for it, and the courts had long memories. The journey to Terra was slow, as all things were in this age of dwindling resources and endless red tape. My flagship, the Aegis of Dawn, sailed through the warp's boiling tides with the stubborn grace of a relic kept running by the prayers of its crew. The corridors were lined with saints' icons and purity seals, their wax cracked and curling. The ship's choir sang hymns without conviction, their voices thin with fatigue. In the quiet hours between warp jumps, I found myself haunted by memories I had thought long buried. Faces of comrades who had fallen centuries ago, the sting of betrayals both personal and political, the hollow victories that had cost more than they had given. Immortality meant never escaping the weight of such ghosts. When we emerged from the warp at Seoul, the sight of the throne world struck me as it always did, a jewel set in a crown of ash. The orbital stations hung in perfect alignment, but many were half-lit, their outer hulls pitted from neglect. The fleet formations that had once bristled with readiness now drifted with the sluggish discipline of soldiers who no longer believed the war would end. I descended into the heart of the imperial palace, through corridors that smelled of incense and cold stone. The air was heavy with the weight of tradition, of ritual masquerading as governance. Servitors clicked and droned along the walls, carrying messages that could have been sent instantly, but were instead delivered with ceremony so old it had outlived its purpose. The hall of the Senatorum Imperialis was vast enough to swallow a city block. Its high vaults were painted with murals of ancient victories, though the colours had faded. The High Lords sat upon their gilded thrones, their faces hidden in the shadow of their canopies. They looked like statues carved from the very dust of the galaxy's bones. Lord Commander, the master of the Administratum, began, his voice sharp as a blade left too long in the cold. Verath Prime is lost, billions dead. The ties from that sector will not recover for centuries. I bowed, but did not kneel. It is lost because your decrees strangled it. My fleets were ordered to wait for approval. My relief ships were halted for inspection. The famine was man-made, yours. A ripple of murmurs passed among the assembled thrones. I had spoken truth, and truth was a dangerous currency here. The master of the ecclesiarchy leaned forward, his lips curling. Careful, Commander. Heresy often begins with the claim that the Emperor's chosen servants have erred. I did not answer him. I looked instead at the Lord Inquisitor, who was watching me with a gaze I had learned to fear long ago. There was recognition in his eyes, not of my loyalty, but of my usefulness. When the session ended, I was summoned privately to his chambers. There, beneath the dim light of a single lumen, he spoke words that would alter the course of my centuries-long existence. The Imperium is rotting, Commander. You see it. I see it. The question is, will you help cut away the gangrene no matter the cost? I gave no answer then, but as I left his chambers, I knew I had already made the decision. Verath Prime had been the first stone to fall. The mountain would not survive the rest, and I would be there when it came crashing down. The golden spires of Terra's capital rose against a sky that never truly brightened, veiled perpetually by haze and the endless smoke of industry. The throne world was a city of contrast, grandeur and decay, faith and cynicism, hope and despair entwined in every stone. It had been my home for centuries, yet every return felt like stepping into a mausoleum draped in silk. The aegis of dawn slipped through orbital defences and docked in the ancient harbour. My retinue moved with practiced silence, each aware of the delicate balance we now navigated. In the days since Verath Prime's fall, rumours had spread like wildfire, whispers of rebellion, of corruption beyond the usual. The Senatorum Imperialis was no longer the steady hand guiding humanity. It had become a labyrinth of serpents, each seeking advantage beneath the gilded masks of civility. Within the vast chambers of the imperial palace, I found no respite. The council awaited me in the Hall of 10,000 Thrones, a name grander than the realities within. The lords sat, faces half hidden by shadows, eyes sharper than any blade. Here, loyalty was currency, and betrayal was a language spoken fluently. Lord Commander, intoned the Praetor Valdrin, his voice like grinding stone. "Your fleets have returned, yet the outer sectors crumble. What say you of these failures?" I met his gaze without flinching. "The failures are not mine alone. When supplies are held for political games and orders delayed for court intrigue, the fault lies with those who command from gilded halls." Murmurs ran through the assembly, but none dared to challenge me openly. Still, I could feel the knife edges behind every word spoken. The Imperium's strength was a lie, sustained by rituals and fear. Beneath the surface, it was fracturing, and I was no longer certain which shards would cut me first. A figure rose from the far end of the hall. Archmagister Chorus, the High Ecclesiarch's emissary. His eyes gleamed with fanatic light. "You speak of duty and honor, Commander, yet your actions sow discord. The Emperor's will is absolute, and his servants must not question the divine order." I did not reply. Instead, I recalled the faces of Verith Prime's starving millions, the empty streets, the silence of a world abandoned by faith and hope alike. The Emperor's will had become a cage, not a beacon. The council session fractured into bitter debates, but I withdrew early, retreating into the labyrinthine passages of the palace. There, away from prying eyes and ears, I found only silence, an echo of the loneliness that had settled deep within me over centuries of endless war and betrayal. The weight of the crown was not gold or jewels, but this endless solitude. Immortality had gifted me time beyond reckoning, but it had stolen the chance for peace. Friends had become memories, alliances had twisted into betrayals, and the empire I swore to defend was slowly turning to dust beneath my feet. It was during one such quiet moment that I was approached by the Senatorum's shadow, the Master of Shadows, a man known only as Varix. His words were few, but his meaning was clear. "There are forces at work, Commander. Forces that see your vision as a threat. They will not hesitate to strike." I nodded, understanding the veiled warning. Trust was a currency more rare than any material wealth here. Alliances could shatter with a whisper, and loyalty was a fragile, fleeting thing. In the days that followed, I sought counsel with old allies, those few who remained unbroken by the Imperium's endless machinations. Among them was Lady Serene, a former commander whose wisdom was matched only by her caution. She warned of unrest in the outer sectors. Worlds once loyal now bristling with defiance, their governors emboldened by the cracks in imperial authority. "We face enemies on two fronts," she said, her eyes reflecting the flickering lights of the war room. "The external threats gather like storm clouds, but the greater danger lies within. The rot spreads from the heart." Her words resonated deeply. The Imperium was a wound festering from within, its surface healing only to reveal deeper scars. And I was caught in the middle, a guardian bound to a corpse, forced to choose between loyalty to a dying empire and the survival of what it once stood for. As I left her chambers, the corridors seemed darker, the shadows longer. Each step echoed the inevitability of the path ahead, a path lined with difficult choices, fragile alliances, and the haunting question of whether salvation was still possible. For now, the throne remained, but the crown it bore was heavy indeed. The outer sectors bled quietly, unnoticed by the glittering thrones that clung to Terra's heart like vultures to carrion. Outposts once thought secure now sent garbled reports. Worlds slipping beyond imperial control, swallowed by shadow and discord. Raiders, cultists, and unknown horrors stalked the void between stars, yet the High Lords remained deaf, their attention fixated on politics and preservation rather than survival. I sat in the dim glow of the Aegis of Dawn's command deck, eyes tracing the constellation maps that blinked with cold indifference. There was no glorious battlefront here, only the creeping dread of neglect. The Senate's decrees forbade me to act, binding my hands with red tape while the galaxy quietly unraveled. Then came the message, an old comrade, one who had vanished in the depths of forgotten wars, now resurfaced with words that stirred the embers of hope and danger alike. He spoke of ancient vaults buried beneath dead worlds, weapons and knowledge beyond the sanction of the Senate, relics powerful enough to turn the tide of fate itself. The temptation was a poison, sweet and sharp. To grasp such power without the approval of the Imperium was heresy, but to ignore the galaxy's dying breath was betrayal. I found myself caught between duty and survival, between the laws of men and the cries of dying stars. In council chambers, my warnings were met with condescension cloaked in formality. The Praetor Valdrin dismissed the threats as rumors, dismissing the outer sectors as lost causes not worth the Empire's dwindling resources. His words echoed hollowly in my ears, a reminder that the true enemy might not be beyond our borders, but seated firmly in the halls of power. Yet, beneath the surface, the cracks deepened. Secret orders passed under breath. Fleets shifted without declaration, and alliances twisted in the dark. I could feel the eyes of old friends turning cold, their smiles masking ambition or fear. The warlord who once inspired legions was becoming a ghost among spectres, his voice drowned by the rising tide of suspicion and silence. And still, I was haunted, not by the threat of war, but by the shadows that grew within my own ranks. The comrade's return was not merely a blessing, it was a test. His loyalty was a question mark, his motives veiled beneath layers of history and pain. In moments stolen from the endless grind of strategy, I confronted him in the silence of the Aegis. His eyes, once bright with camaraderie, now flickered with something darker. A hunger born of long exile and the bitter taste of power denied. "We are at a crossroads," he said softly, voice like gravel worn by time. "The Imperium will not save us. If we wait for their blessing, we will perish." His words were fire and ice. To follow him was to walk the path of rebellion. To reject him was to accept the slow death of everything I had fought for. As the stars outside blinked out one by one, I realized the war was no longer just for worlds, but for souls. And in this darkness, the true battle was only just beginning. The corridors of the Aegis of Dawn felt colder now, the shadows deeper and more menacing. The ship that once symbolized hope and relentless duty had become a vessel of secrets, where whispered plans hung like daggers behind every smile. The warlord moved through its labyrinthine halls with a measured grace, aware that the true enemies often wore faces of friends. The assassination attempt came in the dead hours, swift and silent. No blade cut flesh, no bullet tore armor. Only trust was pierced. The message was clear. Loyalty in the Imperium was a commodity, and mine had been bought and sold without my knowledge. Wounded, not in body but in spirit, I convened with my closest circle, a tight-knit cadre of commanders and advisors whose allegiance had weathered countless storms. Among them was the returning comrade, whose presence was now a question mark of loyalty rather than certainty. The old bonds between us, once forged in fire and blood, were fraying. His eyes betrayed secrets he dared not speak aloud. His counsel grew more urgent, more dangerous. He whispered of alliances forged in darkness, of power beyond the Senate's reach, offerings that could turn the tide but at a price yet unspoken. I weighed his words carefully, knowing that to accept was to step beyond the pale of imperial law. To refuse was to risk alienating perhaps the only true ally left in these fractured times. The warlord's nights became restless. In the quiet moments before dawn, I grappled with the razor edge between pragmatism and principle. Could the survival of the Imperium justify the shadows that now crept into its heart? Was the loyalty I demanded from others not owed to myself as well? In the silence, the comrade approached, his voice low and steady. "We are bound not by laws but by necessity. The Senate will bleed the Empire dry before it acts. We must act now, together, or fall alone." His proposal was a lifeline and a noose. I accepted, not because I trusted him fully, but because the galaxy's slow decay left no room for hesitation. Yet beneath the alliance lay an unspoken pact, a fragile bridge built on shared ambition and mutual doubt. Both of us knew that betrayal lurked close, a silent blade beneath the smiles we wore for each other. The warlord stood on the precipice, between hope and ruin, loyalty and treason, past glories and a future shrouded in storm. And as the stars beyond flickered uncertainly, so too did the fate of an empire rest on the edge of a knife. The battlefield was silent now, a hushed monument to blood and sacrifice. Scattered relics of war, rusted weapons, shattered armor, lay half buried beneath the ashen soil, telling stories that no song could capture. Here, where the cries of the fallen once echoed through the smoke, only the wind dared to speak. I walked alone among the graves, the weight of immortality pressing down like the cold stones beneath my feet. Centuries had passed since that conflict, one of many that had shaped the Imperium's rise. But the faces of those lost remained vivid, carved into my mind with cruel clarity. The dead were not just names in dusty ledgers. They were comrades, brothers and sisters in arms, who had bled for ideals now tarnished beyond recognition. Their sacrifices, once a beacon of hope, now felt like embers smouldering in a storm, fragile and fading. I knelt by a weathered marker, fingers tracing the inscription worn thin by time. Memories surged, laughter shared before battle, promises whispered under starlit skies. The bitter sting of betrayal when allies turned their blades inward. Immortality had granted me the burden of endless remembrance, a curse that tethered me to the past with chains stronger than any prison. In those moments, the empire I had fought for seemed distant, a ghost drifting through the corridors of my mind. The ideals that once guided me now felt like fragile illusions, shattered by decades of war, deceit, and loss. Yet, amidst the sorrow, a flicker of resolve remained. The past was a weight I could neither shed nor escape, but it was also a foundation, a grim reminder of what was at stake. The flames of hope might be faint, but they had not yet died. Rising from the graves, I looked to the horizon where the first light of dawn threatened the endless night. The Imperium was at a crossroads, and my path, torn between loyalty and rebellion, faith and doubt, was far from certain. The warlord carried the embers of the past within, a silent flame against the gathering darkness. The ecclesiarchy's voice rose like thunder through the veins of the Imperium, a decree wrapped in sanctity and accusation. To question the emperor's will was to invite damnation, and I had become the target of their wrath. In the grand cathedrals of terror, spires pierced the heavens, and stained glass windows cast kaleidoscopes of light upon the faithful. But beneath the gilded prayers and hymns lurked suspicion, a cancer that spread through sermons and whispers alike. Propaganda twisted my name into a brand of heresy. Tales of betrayal replaced stories of valor. Victories were recast as crimes against the divine order. The very armies I once led now wavered, torn between devotion to the creed and loyalty to a commander branded an enemy of faith. The high ecclesiarch's emissaries marched through imperial halls, their eyes blazing with righteous fury. Their words were weapons, sharp and unyielding. I was declared a threat not only to the empire, but to the soul of humanity itself. Among my ranks, fissures formed. Trusted officers hesitated, their gaze flickering with doubt. Letters intercepted whispered of conspiracies, of plans to sever ties and purge the tainted from the legions. The very fabric of unity was unraveling thread by thread. Yet deeper still, the shadow of my old comrade loomed large. His movements grew more secretive, his ambitions veiled behind feigned loyalty. I sensed a fracture between us, one not easily bridged by words or battle oaths. In the solitude of my chamber, I confronted the cruel irony of my fate. The warlord who had vowed eternal service to the Imperium was now cast out by those who wielded faith as a sword. Immortality had not shielded me from betrayal. It had exposed me to it in its most painful form. The masks of the faithful were many, smiling faces concealing daggers, prayers whispered over plots, and I stood among them, a relic of a dying age, struggling to hold fast to a fading truth. The Imperium's heart beat unevenly, caught between devotion and decay. And in this fragile moment, I realized that salvation would require more than valor. It would demand sacrifice, and perhaps the ultimate betrayal. The sky above the outer sectors darkened not with storm clouds, but with the smoke of burning worlds. The quiet rot that had once whispered in shadows now screamed in the fury of war. Fleets clashed beyond the horizon, their weapons tearing stars apart and sending ripples through the warp that echoed like screams through the soul of the Imperium. For the first time in decades, I commanded openly against the will of the Senate. My banners flew alongside battle fleets carved from loyalist remnants, marred but unbroken. The fires of rebellion were kindled not in defiance, but in desperation, a last stand to preserve the dream of humanity's survival. The battles were brutal and unyielding. Star cruisers shattered against one another like the bones of giants. Ground forces fought in hellish trenches carved into the dying soil of once great worlds. Each victory was a Pyrrhic testament to endurance, each defeat a chasm swallowing hope whole. Yet amid the carnage, the true war raged within the heart of the Imperium. In the grand chambers of the Imperial Palace, I faced the High Lords, those ancient sentinels draped in gold and shadows. Our exchange was a dance of veiled threats and hollow courtesies, each word carefully measured, each silence a loaded gun. Neither side spoke the truth outright, yet both understood that the fragile peace was shattered, and civil war was inevitable. The skies of terror trembled with unrest as the factions aligned like storm clouds before the deluge. Old loyalties faltered. New alliances were forged in the crucible of necessity and fear. The empire I had pledged to defend was tearing itself apart, and I was at the eye of the storm. Between battles, I wrestled with doubt and resolve. The burden of immortality weighed heavier with each passing day, bearing witness to the unraveling of all I held dear. Friends turned enemies, ideals corrupted beyond recognition, and a future clouded in shadows. The warlord's voice, once a clarion call to unity, was now a whisper among shouts of rebellion and betrayal. Yet still, I fought, not for glory or power, but for the flickering ember of hope that something greater might survive the coming darkness. And as the skies broke open with the fury of war, I knew the true test had only just begun. The return of my old comrade had once kindled a fragile hope, a bond forged in battles past, tempered by shared sacrifice. But hope is a cruel thing in times like these, and trust even crueler. The revelation came not with fanfare, but with cold, whispered words in the dead of night. He had made a pact, a dark covenant with forces that lurked beyond mortal comprehension. Powers whispered of in the forbidden tomes, entities that promised strength at a cost too terrible to name. When he offered me the same bargain, the choice was laid bare. Surrender loyalty for power. Abandon the dying empire for the promise of freedom. The temptation was a blade, sharp and irresistible, cutting through centuries of duty and doubt alike. I refused. In that refusal, the alliance we had built, fragile and tentative, shattered like glass. His betrayal was swift and decisive, a dagger thrust deep into the heart of our cause. Key strongholds fell, armies once loyal turned like wolves, and the warlord found himself besieged not only by external enemies, but by the brother he had once trusted above all. The battlefield became a crucible of sorrow. Each clash echoed with the pain of broken bonds, each victory stained with the bitterness of loss. The comrades' eyes, once bright with friendship, now gleamed with cold ambition, a mirror reflecting the darkness creeping into my own soul. I stood amidst the ruins of what had been our shared dream, torn between rage and despair. The warlord who had vowed eternal service to the Imperium now faced the deepest betrayal. A brother's knife twisted in the shadows, and as the stars blinked coldly overhead, I realized that the war was no longer just for the galaxy, but for the very soul of what it meant to be human. The Imperial Palace, a fortress of ancient stone and whispered prayers, became a crucible of flame and shadow. The fires that consumed its outer wings were not born of accident or rebellion's open fury, but of whispered betrayals and secret vendettas. Within the labyrinthine halls, the Senatorum Imperialis fractured like shattered glass, each shard sharp and dangerous. Lords once bound by duty turned on each other with cold precision, seeking advantage amidst the chaos. The bonds of trust, already frayed by years of decay, unraveled completely. I watched from the shadows as allies became enemies, and enemies took the throne with ruthless cunning. The High Lord's smiles grew colder, their eyes sharper. No longer did they speak of unity. Their words were weapons, each syllable a promise of ruin. The warlord's presence, once a symbol of steadfast resolve, became a lightning rod for accusation and fear. The Ecclesiarchy's preachers stoked the flames of suspicion, their sermons painting me as a heretic bent on destruction. The very faith that had once bound the empire now threatened to consume it. Yet amid the smoke and ruin, a deeper danger lurked. The comrade's betrayal had sown seeds of discord too bitter to ignore. Factions loyal to him moved like shadows through the palace, striking unseen blows that tore at the heart of the Imperium. In the throne hall itself, the air grew thick with tension. The golden canopy that sheltered the Emperor's seat seemed to tremble, as if sensing the Empire's fragility. The warlord faced the High Lords in a council fraught with venom and deceit, where every word could ignite the powder keg. The choice was clear: to fight with honor or to survive by any means necessary. But survival came at a cost that threatened to shatter what little remained of the Imperium's soul. As the fires burned and the throne hall echoed with cries of betrayal, the warlord understood that the endgame was near, and that the fate of humanity itself hung in the balance. The oath I swore was eternal, a vow etched not just in words, but in blood and time. To serve the Imperium until stars ceased to shine, to defend humanity's fragile flame against the encroaching void. Yet now, that oath lay fractured beneath the weight of betrayal and despair. The council chamber was a storm of voices, each laced with venom and desperation. Accusations flew like shards of glass, cutting through the fragile facade of unity that had long been nothing more than illusion. Old allies turned their backs, whispers of treason colouring every glance. The warlord stood alone amidst the chaos, the burden of immortality heavier than ever. Centuries of battles, sacrifices, and losses culminated in this moment, a crossroads where the line between salvation and ruin blurred beyond recognition. His gaze met that of the comrade turned adversary, a silent war waged in glances sharp as blades. The betrayal was a wound that festered, its poison seeping into every corner of the empire. In the silence that followed, a choice was laid bare: uphold the shattered ideals of a dying empire, or embrace the darkness promised by rebellion and power. The warlord's voice, steady yet laced with sorrow, echoed through the chamber. The Imperium may fall, but it will not die. It lives in the hearts of those who remember its light. But words were no longer enough. The fractures within ran too deep, the wounds too raw. The final act had begun, a tragic symphony of sacrifice and loss, where every note struck a chord of regret and hope intertwined. As the echoes of the shattered oath faded, the warlord prepared for the ultimate confrontation, one that would decide not just his fate, but the fate of all mankind. The twilight of the Imperium was not marked by a grand battle or triumphant march, but by a quiet, somber reckoning. As the suns of distant worlds dimmed and the shadows lengthened, so too did the light within the warlord's heart wane, heavy with the knowledge of what had been lost and what could never be reclaimed. In the once glorious halls of terror, silence settled like a shroud. The echoes of past glories whispered through empty corridors, memories trapped beneath layers of dust and faded banners. The Senatorum Imperialis, fractured and hollow, was a mausoleum of dreams deferred. The warlord moved through the ruins of what had been an empire, his footsteps a solitary drumbeat against the quiet. The faces of the fallen, friends, foes, and strangers alike, haunted every step, their sacrifices etched into the fabric of time. Immortality had become a prison. Each century another link forged in endless chains of regret. Thoughts drifted to the comrade who had betrayed him, the brother in arms turned adversary, whose choices had torn apart not only armies, but the very soul of the Imperium. Forgiveness was a luxury long lost to war. Instead, there was only the cold calculus of necessity. The stars outside flickered like dying embers, each one a testament to a battle won or lost, a hope kindled or extinguished. The warlord knew that the final conflict was approaching, a confrontation that would decide the fate of all humanity. Yet even in the gathering darkness, a faint light remained, a fragile spark born of memory, of love, of the undying human spirit. It was this light that sustained him, that gave meaning to the sacrifices and betrayals etched into his endless existence. As twilight bled into night, the warlord steeled himself for the last stand. The end was near, but in the dying light, there was still a chance for redemption, or at least for peace. The final reckoning was not heralded by trumpets or blazing stars, but by a silence heavier than any battlefield roar. The cosmos itself seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the moment when destiny and choice would collide in a fracture that could shatter worlds. The warlord stood on the bridge of the Aegis of Dawn, eyes fixed on the swirling maelstrom beyond. The confluence of fleets, both loyal and traitorous, converging in a deadly embrace. The Imperium's last hope and its greatest threat were poised to clash, and in that storm, all would be revealed. Beside him, his once trusted comrade, now a bitter rival, bore the same heavy gaze. Their shared past was a wound still bleeding, a testament to the cost of power and the fragility of trust. Neither spoke, but the weight of unspoken words hung between them like a blade. The battle that followed was merciless, a symphony of destruction played across the void. Ships shattered like glass, stars dimmed beneath the fury of endless war, and lives were extinguished in the blink of an eye. Yet amidst the chaos, the warlord's resolve never faltered. In the final moments, when steel met steel and wills clashed, the true test was not of strength, but of spirit. Sacrifices were made, alliances shattered, and choices carved in pain and hope alike. The warlord faced a crucible that demanded everything he was, and everything he was willing to lose. When the dust settled and the echoes of war faded into the void, the Imperium lay broken, but not defeated. The cost had been unimaginable, the losses countless, but from the ashes, a fragile dawn emerged. The warlord's fate, intertwined with that of the Empire, was sealed, not in triumph or glory, but in the quiet acceptance of the burdens borne and the sacrifices made. The smoke of battle still hung thick in the void, a pall that stretched like a shroud over the broken remnants of the Imperium. Worlds lay in ruin, their skies darkened by ash and despair, while distant stars flickered weakly, as if mourning the cost of survival. In the quiet aftermath, the warlord moved among the scattered remnants of his once mighty fleet. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of dying engines and the whispered prayers of those who still clung to hope. He felt the weight of centuries pressing down, not as a burden, but as a relentless reminder of all that had been lost. The ghosts of friends and foes alike lingered in his mind, their faces etched with pain and regret. Immortality was a curse that forced him to bear witness to the endless cycle of rise and fall, hope and despair. The empire he had fought so fiercely to protect was now a shadow of its former self, a fragile ember flickering against the encroaching darkness. Yet even in this desolation, the warlord sensed a faint stirring, a call to rebuild, to remember, to carry the legacy forward. But the echoes of betrayal still echoed loudest. The comrade who had once stood beside him now vanished into legend, his name spoken with equal parts reverence and hatred. Their bond, forged in the fires of war, had been shattered by ambition and despair, leaving scars that time could not heal. As he gazed into the endless night, the warlord understood that the true battle was far from over. The ashes of the past were fertile ground for new conflicts, and the echoes of old wounds would shape the fate of generations yet unborn. The story of the Imperium, of loyalty and betrayal, of sacrifice and survival, was written not just in stars and steel, but in the hearts of those who endured. And though the future was uncertain, the warlord knew that he would carry its weight, alone, immortal, and forever bound to a destiny he could neither escape nor fully comprehend. The horizon burned with the final light of a dying empire, a crimson glow that seeped into the void like a wound refusing to heal. The once proud banners of the Imperium hung tattered and worn, their colours dulled by endless conflict and the relentless passage of time. The warlord stood alone upon the shattered bridge of the Aegis of Dawn, the remnants of his fleet scattered like fallen stars around him. Immortality had granted him countless victories, but it hadn't spared him from the crushing loneliness that now threatened to consume what remained of his soul. In the distance, the throne world's golden spires still shone faintly, a beacon to some and a tomb to others. The Empire's heart beat unevenly, fragile, faltering, yet defiant against the encroaching darkness. The memories of those lost, friends, enemies, and the betrayer who had once been a brother, wove through his mind like a tapestry of pain and hope. Each thread told a story of sacrifice, ambition, and the unyielding will to survive. He reached out to touch the cold surface of the command console, feeling the echo of battles fought and decisions made. The weight of leadership was a chain, binding him to a destiny he could neither deny nor escape. As the final light flickered and faded, the warlord understood the truth of immortality, that it was not a gift, but a burden. To watch empires rise and fall, to carry the scars of countless betrayals, to endure the solitude of endless years. Yet within that burden lay the faintest spark, a promise that even in the darkest night, a new dawn might one day break. The warlord closed his eyes, embracing the silence that followed. The empire was ending, but its story would live on, in the ashes, the echoes, and the hearts of those who dared to remember. The stars above had long since ceased to shine as they once did. The endless night stretched on, a vast and silent testament to the cost of immortality and ambition. The warlord stood alone amid the ruins of an empire that once spanned galaxies, now but crumbled echoes beneath the cold gaze of eternity. Time had become both enemy and companion, each moment a reminder of victories won and friends lost. The weight of endless years pressed down, a relentless burden no mortal soul could bear. Immortality was a cage of memories, a prison forged from the ashes of hope and the shadows of regret. The warlord's gaze drifted to the dying sun beyond the shattered hull of the Aegis of Dawn. Its pale light flickered weakly, a final breath before darkness claimed it forever. In that fading glow, he saw the reflection of his own journey, once radiant with promise, now dimmed by sacrifice and sorrow. He thought of the countless faces that had marked his path, comrades turned foes, mentors betrayed, and a brother whose knife had pierced deeper than any blade. Their stories were woven into his immortal soul, a tapestry of loyalty and treason that no time could unravel. Yet even as the empire fell and the last light died, the warlord found within himself a fragile peace. The cost had been unimaginable, the loss profound, but in the silence of the eternal night, there was understanding, a reckoning not just of worlds and wars, but of the spirit that endures beyond the fall of stars. He whispered a final vow, a promise not to forget, not to surrender, and to carry the legacy forward in the quiet shadows of history. For in every end there is a beginning, and in every death a seed of renewal. The Aegis of Dawn drifted silently into the void, a solitary monument to a forgotten age, and as the eternal night closed in, the warlord faded into legend, a shadow among stars, bound forever to the fate of the Imperium he once called home.